Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Cultured Pull List. In this episode, I'll be talking about the comic inspiration for some of the stuff in the new Daredevil Born Again series, specifically the Mayor Fisk storyline and the storylines involving the villain Muse. So, we got a lot to cover today, so strap in and let's get into it. Hello and welcome to the Cultured Pull List, the show where I, your host Mike, breaks down graphic novels and comic storylines and compares them to other adaptations and other medias or other mediums. This week I'll be talking about the inspiration of some elements of the new-ish series Daredevil Born Again. It just wrapped up a few weeks ago, maybe almost a month by the time this comes out, but the series featured heavily elements from the Mayor Fisk storyline, and the show also featured the villain Muse, which we'll talk about a little bit later about how the deviations the show made with that character. But both the Mayor Fisk storyline and the villain Muse showed up in Chuck Soule's run of Daredevil, which was about 10 years ago that came out, and I gotta say it was really good. I'll talk about that more later, but yeah, let's first get into the breakdown of the story, and of course, as usual, I will have chapters or time codes if you're listening to the audio version, so you can skip around if you don't want to hear the breakdown or anything like that. So yeah, let's get into that. So this is the two things we're going to tackle today are two story arcs from the Chuck Soule Daredevil run. The first one is Dark Art, and it is the introduction of the villain Muse. This was written by Charles Soule, with art by Ron Garney and inks by Ron Garney. The colorist was Matt Milla, and the letterer is VC's Clayton Cowles. And these issues were released between August and December in 2016. Now, the second story arc, there's a bit of a separation of several issues between Dark Art and the Mayor Fisk story arc, but Mayor Fisk once again was written by Charles Soule. This time, the artists were Stefano Landini and returning Ron Garney. The inkers were Stefano Landini and Ron Garney. Again, the color is Matt Milla, and the letterer is VC's Clayton Cowles. Now, these issues were released almost like a year after Dark Art ended, which was November 2017 through March 2018. So yeah, I'm going to jump in and break down both of these story arcs real quick. So to kind of set the stage here, at the beginning of this Daredevil comic run, Daredevil had left the city because his identity was revealed, but then the kids of the Purple Man, called the Purple Children, used their powers to erase his identity from everyone's minds. So Matt comes back to the city. He's got this new black costume, and he also gets a job working in the DA's office. So that's pretty much where we're at when the story begins. And then when the story starts, there's this mural that shows up in this art gallery along with the body of a janitor, and Daredevil and his new sidekick Blind Spot, aka Samuel Chu, investigate it. And once the police show up and start taking tests and everything, they discover that there's like the blood of over 100 people in the paint. Like the paint is their blood, and so they figure there's a serial killer on the loose. And yeah, like I said earlier, Matt's working for the DA, and Matt's kind of trying to balance his life as Daredevil with this new workload working in the DA's office, trying to get in good with them. And he meets up with Foggy, who he has a strained relationship now, and he's trying to balance all aspects of his life. But then somebody breaks into the art gallery where the blood mural is and writes a message saying you're only as good as your last performance, and writes an address. It's assumed that it's the serial killer who made the mural in the first place who did this, and Matt finds out about it, and he makes his way to the address along with Samuel, and they find this really weird art installation where it's dead bodies, but they're all bodies of Inhumans, and they're all kind of spread out and made to look like they're doing everyday activities, like going to the bathroom, ironing clothes, watching TV. And Matt hears the killer nearby the art installation, so he suits up and goes after them. And the killer is just standing there on the rooftop and doesn't seem like afraid or trying to run away from Daredevil at all. And what's really weird about this guy is he kind of absorbs all of the sensory information around him, like, you know, sound and smell and everything. So it really messes with Matt's senses, and he just kind of sees like a void there, so it's kind of hard to track this guy. But he tries to fight him, but the guy also has super strength, and Matt isn't able to overpower him, and the guy escapes. And when Matt goes back downstairs to the art installation / murder site, he finds that a bunch of Inhuman security has shown up, because the Inhumans have a base in New York now. And their head of security, Frank McGee, shows up, and he explains that the killer is also an Inhuman, but they don't really know anything about him. So then Matt makes his way to the Inhumans base and talks with Medusa, who's now the leader of the Inhumans, and he's trying to get information about this killer and kind of, I guess, team up with the Inhumans to take him down. But she doesn't want to give Matt any information, and even has her guard Karnak attack him. And this guy can see like all the weak spots in a person. That's his Inhuman power, but Matt's still able to beat him. But Medusa still won't give him any information. But then Frank McGee takes Matt aside and says, you know, I'll help you. Like, you know, Medusa's kind of got her hands tied. She doesn't want to look weak in front of her people, and she wants to take care of this herself. But he's willing to pass any information to Daredevil so that he can take this guy down. Meanwhile, the killer strikes again, but this time it's very public, and he kidnaps this judge right out of a courtroom, and Blindspot happens to be there. So when the killer takes the judge away to his lair in the sewers, Blindspot's able to track him down, and he fights the killer a little bit, but the killer gets away, and Blindspot decides to just double back and free all the people that the killer had taken but not killed yet. And then he decides to go after the killer again, but instead he ends up getting kidnapped, but he drops his phone. And Daredevil is able to find the phone, but no sign of Blindspot. So Daredevil decides to use his powers to try and locate the killer again. This time, but he can't really rely on his normal method of sensing people, so he has to kind of focus his powers to try to find this like void of sensory information, and it takes a lot out of him. But he is able to track down the killer to another lair he has, which is more like an art studio with a bunch of like dead bodies and body parts and blood everywhere. It's pretty gruesome, but Daredevil tracks him down there. But before Daredevil can get to him, the killer gouges out Blindspot's eyes and runs away. Daredevil runs after him, but the killer kind of gives him a choice to save these people that he's draining the blood out of, or capture him, and Daredevil chooses to save the people. He still runs after him, but the killer got to the rooftop, but he was apprehended by the Inhumans, the security, and at this point we unmask the killer, and he's got like this really messed up looking face with these like deep sunken eyes with blood coming out of him. At this point we know that he calls himself Muse, and he's got this like messed up view of art, and he thinks that he's like making these great art productions by killing people. And that's pretty much the end of this first story arc here. Now, a decent amount of stuff happens in between that and the Mayor Fisk story arc. There was this other arc where involving the Hand, and Blindspot's mom shows up and takes him to China, I think, and it turns out she's involved with the Hand, and she uses some of the Beast's power to restore his sight. So Blindspot's able to still be a vigilante once he gets back to New York. That's pretty much all the important stuff that happened, though, that relates to this next story arc. They had been kind of laying the groundwork for a while in both the Daredevil comics and other aspects of the Marvel Universe to show that Fisk was running for mayor and garnering support. So the Mayor Fisk story arc starts out with Fisk already winning, and Matt and Foggy are just like trying to figure out how the hell this happened. Matt goes to work the next day and he finds out from DA Hochberg that Fisk is starting this campaign against vigilantes, and the DA's office is going to have to start building cases against masked heroes. And, you know, Matt is not happy about that, but he basically has to do this or he's going to be fired. So that night, Matt goes out. Oh, and he switched back to his red suit at this point. So Matt goes out and goes out as Daredevil to try and stop some crimes, goes on patrol. But the first robbery he tries to foil is actually a sting. It's actually cops looking for vigilantes. So they're actually able to arrest Daredevil, and they take him to Fisk, and they have a bit of a confrontation, but not much really happens except that Daredevil's able to escape, and he breaks the window of Fisk's office and escapes and starts being pursued by the police, and Fisk tries to spin it that like the Daredevil attacked him. And Muse in prison sees all this on the TV, and he decides to escape from prison. To escape the police, Daredevil calls Blind Spot, who does have the power to turn invisible, so Blind Spot gets in a spare Daredevil costume, and he kind of switches with Matt, and they start chasing Blind Spot, and then he goes invisible, and they lose him. Then the next day, when Matt's at work, he gets a call from the mayor, and the mayor asks him, Mayor Fisk asks Matt to be his deputy mayor, and Matt actually agrees, thinking he can kind of work the system from the inside. And soon there's this big press announcement that Fisk has named Murdoch his deputy mayor, but it all turns out to be just like a publicity stunt, obviously. And Fisk saddles Matt with just all this busy work trying to like learn all of the laws and penal codes and everything, and taking up all this time, so he can't actually do anything to like get in Fisk's way. But since Matt's still working in the building, he's able to hear Fisk's conversation, so he's sort of getting some information there. And Matt still like refuses to stop being Daredevil, even though the cops are on him, and he foils another robbery. But he's almost captured by the police when Frank McGee, the Inhuman security guy, shows up and uses his powers to incapacitate the police and takes Matt for a little bit of a ride in this like Inhuman flying car thing. And it turns out that Muse has escaped and killed a bunch of Inhumans to get out. So Matt warns Blind Spot, thinking that Muse might be after him again. But Blind Spot's already figured out Muse is back because he sees this giant mural that Muse has made on a building. So for the next few days, all the news coverage is about all these murals Muse has made. He's made all of these murals about vigilantes and superheroes, pretty much the street level ones, and they seem sympathetic towards them. And Matt approaches Fisk and tries to convince him to let the vigilantes take care of Muse because he'll just kill the police that go after him. But Fisk doesn't seem too happy about it and tells him to screw off, basically. Meanwhile, Fisk is setting up all these deals with all of the criminals in New York City, like Hammerhead and the Magi and whatever. Basically still kind of keeping his criminal empire while being the mayor. Muse is making this mural of the Punisher one night, and these girls approach him and want to get a selfie with him because they think he's cool. And he does take the selfie with him. He's actually a pretty friendly guy. The way he's portrayed, even though, you know, he's a psycho killer. But then the cops show up and the girls run away, but Muse is able to just completely slaughter all of the cops. And Fisk makes a big show about putting a memorial for the cops, and he also spins it and blames Punisher for killing all the cops, which makes some of the public turn on Punisher and vigilantes in general. Now, with all this upset, Daredevil meets with Blind Spot and tells him they need to work together to take down Muse, but Blind Spot, you know, has his own personal vendetta against Muse because he captured and blinded him. So he goes off on his own and wants to take down Muse himself. So he makes this like chemical concoction and sprays it all over the mural that was put on the city capitol. But before he's even finished, Muse shows up behind him and shoves him off the building. And meanwhile, Daredevil is gathering all of his vigilante friends to take down Fisk. He knows that there's going to be a meeting tonight with Fisk and a bunch of the criminals he's been consorting with. So he gets a bunch of his vigilante pals, including Luke Cage, Jessica Jones, Iron Fist, Misty Knight, Echo, Spider-Man, and Moon Knight. While all that's going on, Blind Spot is falling to his death, but he manages to catch himself and climb back up top the building and confront Muse. Meanwhile, at the crime boss meeting, they're waiting for Fisk, but he isn't showing up. Matt and the other heroes are just kind of biding their time and waiting while Blind Spot and Muse fight, and Blind Spot's not really able to overpower Muse because he got that crazy inhuman strength, but he's contacted like by the Beast while he's fighting, and the Beast offers Blind Spot his powers to defeat Muse, so Blind Spot agrees, and he's able to use the crazy powers of the Beast to defeat Muse and beat the crap out of him, but it also sets the rooftop on fire. Back at the criminal meeting, they start turning on each other and are about to kill each other, but Spider-Man steps in and stops any bloodshed, but that kind of blows their cover. So then all the other vigilantes rush in, but Daredevil hangs back and he realizes that a police SWAT team's coming in, and he realizes that the whole thing was a sting. It was a trap to get both the criminals and to capture the vigilantes. So he hangs back and decides that he's going to try and find a way to get his friends released from prison. Back with Muse and Blind Spot, he doesn't like being defeated by Blind Spot, so he runs into the flames that are engulfing the rooftop, and he ends himself. Back with Daredevil, he actively goes and confronts Fisk and picks a fight with him. He's not exactly operating at his full mental capacity because he's upset with his friends getting captured, and Fisk is actually able to defeat him, and he kind of just leaves him there and lets the police arrest him, and he goes to this press conference, like big event thing that he was planning, but in the middle of his speech, Fisk is shot with a bunch of arrows, and it turns out that they're from the Hand. The Hand has shown up because the Beast sent them, because Blind Spot called upon the Beast's power, but didn't agree to like all of the Beast's terms to like be, his slave, basically. So now the Hand are attacking New York City, and Mayor Fisk is in critical condition, and Daredevil is now in the back of a police car. He's under arrest, and that is actually how this arc ends. Now, that ended on kind of a cliffhanger, which I was really surprised. I ended up reading ahead. Don't worry, I won't leave you hanging. I'll just give you a really brief recap of what happened that kind of, in the following issues, that kind of wrapped up what was going on at the end of the Mayor Fisk storyline. So basically, while Wilson Fisk was in the hospital recovering from his severe wounds, Matt ended up becoming the acting mayor, and he used a bunch of like crisis powers to release all of his vigilante friends who helped him fight against the Hand, and he also was kind of balancing giving orders and stuff as mayor, as well as going out and being Daredevil and fighting on the front lines. And then this other like really crazy group of like ancient monster fighter type people showed up and helped fight the Hand as well. And in the end, Daredevil and all of his vigilante pals ended up defeating the Beast and killing him. And then Mayor Fisk came back and became mayor again, and he fired Matt. But as Matt was leaving the mayor's office, Capitol building, he ended up overhearing with his enhanced hearing that Fisk actually fixed the vote and became mayor under false pretenses. So that's kind of how they wrapped that up, tied it up in a little bow. It was like, I think 3 or 4 issues after the end of the Mayor Fisk storyline. A few quick thoughts I have on just these 2 story arcs. I really like the writing. I really like Chuck Soule's writing as Daredevil. Kind of makes me want to go back and just read his whole arc, but it just felt very like quintessentially Daredevil to me. It just really felt like, I was obviously reading a different creator, a different artist interpretation, but it still felt very much in line with everything I love about Daredevil. I thought that was really cool, but then he added a bunch of new characters and concepts. Like, I really like the character of Muse. I think him being a weird serial killer guy that goes around making art with his victims, I really liked that idea, and I really liked his personality in there too. I didn't get too much into it in the breakdown, but he just had like no qualms about anything. He was just like super chill, wasn't like scared at all. He was like friendly in a weird, awkward, like eerie way. I just really enjoyed his character. And I thought it was also interesting his powers. Like he had enhanced strength and everything, but he also was just like a sensory void. I think that was really a cool way to set him up as an adversary to Daredevil. I'm kind of on the fence with the whole Inhuman thing. I mean, I think that works to give him more powers, but I feel like this was part of a time in Marvel where they were really pushing the Inhumans. This was, I think, just by like about a year or so before the Inhuman show came out, and they were already pushing Inhumans really hard in the Agents of Shield show, and usually the comics kind of reflect usually what Marvel's doing in the shows and movies, at least to some degree. So there was definitely a period of time where they were really pushing the Inhumans hard, and it didn't really work because nobody liked the Inhuman show. So they kind of dropped it a bit after that. But so I think that was kind of probably why they made Muse an Inhuman and brought the Inhumans in. I think the only thing that really added to bringing the Inhumans in was that Frank McGee, like head of security guy, was kind of a cool, like side character for Daredevil. So that was all with Muse. I really like the concept of Fisk becoming mayor. I do kind of like obviously it's not, an exciting notion or a pleasant notion, but the idea of just kind of a really corrupt guy coming in and being the leader now. Like they've done similar things where Lex Luthor became president in DC Comics at one point. I do kind of like that idea where the villain tries to be more legitimate and becomes elected to some public office, but is still doing shady stuff. And the heroes have to not only take them down with like their fists, but they have to figure out how to wade through all the legal and political complications as well. So I think that whole idea is really cool. I think overall though, the Mayor Fisk storyline itself really felt a bit uneventful, and it really was just kind of a setup for. It did feel kind of just like a setup for Devil's Reign, which came a little later and was more like the culmination of the whole Mayor Fisk thing, and was actually Daredevil and other heroes taking down Fisk. And in a way, that's kind of how the Daredevil Born Again series felt like the first season. We definitely got some cool stuff in there, but overall, it did feel like a build up to the next season, which is probably going to adapt more of the Devil's Reign storyline. This season feels like it was more just about, Fisk becoming mayor, and which is very much like the Mayor Fisk storyline. So overall, I think I liked the dark art storyline a little bit more than the Mayor Fisk storyline. And I will say with Muse, even though I really liked his character, I don't know, it just felt a little bit premature to just kill him off. I kind of would have liked to see him become more of a recurring Daredevil villain, because he did feel a little bit underdeveloped, I guess. And that's why I was really hoping the show was going to do a little bit more with Muse, but we'll get to that in a second. The last thing I want to talk about the comics themselves is the art. I thought both artists did a really good job, but I do think that Ron Garney's art really stuck out to me. I really liked the like halftone, like old timey comic dots, that he had like in the background of his art. It really made it feel like you don't really see that much anymore because of the way they print things now. That's kind of like a retro look, and I think adding that was just kind of unique and kind of brought a cool twist to his art. So I really liked that, and I really like, because I'm pretty sure he at least had a huge, if not the main input in Muse's design, and I really love Muse's design. So yeah, I really liked Ron Garney's art in this. And another thing about the art, a lot of the cover art for the Mayor Fisk storyline was done by Dan Mora, which is really cool. I really love Dan Mora's art. I've really only been familiar with him recently, but he's done a lot of stuff with DC recently, and he currently is like he's doing the art for Batman Superman World's Finest and Justice League Unlimited. He did it for Absolute Power. He's a really great artist. I really like his art style, so just kind of wanted to mention that. But let's get into comparing like the book versus the series and kind of what they did. So I think one of the main differences between the series and the comic was that in the comic, Wilson Fisk doesn't know that Matt Murdock is Daredevil because of the purple children erasing that from everybody's mind. So that really changes a lot of story, because it really wouldn't make sense for them to have Fisk bring Matt Murdock in as deputy mayor in the show. So I'm glad they didn't do that, because that only works if Fisk doesn't know that Matt is Daredevil. But I think overall they did capture the overall essence of, the Mayor Fisk storyline, where he's going after the vigilantes, and, he's assembling an anti-vigilante task force, which in the Devil's Reign, it's more like he starts recruiting villains to go after the vigilantes, so maybe they'll do something like that in season 2. I don't know. I think another thing that the show captured really well was just how, like, shocking and kind of out of left field it was that Wilson Fisk just became mayor. In the comics, they laid the groundwork a bit. They were definitely leading up to it, which this sort of did an echo. Like at the end, like there was like an end credit scene tag where it seemed like he wanted to become mayor, but there really wasn't much lead up. And I feel like in the comics, there wasn't a whole lot of lead up either. There was a little bit, but not a whole lot. So it kind of added to like the shock factor of like, oh, geez, this guy's one of the biggest villains in Marvel Comics is, the mayor now. That's crazy. So I think they did a good job capturing that in the show. Overall, I really enjoyed myself with the show. There was some mixed bag. There's definitely some stuff, and I think a lot of the problems that the show had with like pacing and some other things was because there was like a completely different creative team at first, and they had to, overhaul a lot of stuff and stitch stuff together and change a bunch of stuff. So I feel like season 2 is going to be better. But one of the things that I think unfortunately suffered from that is the character of Muse. I was honestly pretty disappointed with how they dealt with Muse in the show. I think the comic did a way better job, and like I said earlier, I felt like even in the comic, Muse was a little underdeveloped. So I was really hoping the show would, develop him more. I didn't expect him to make him an Inhuman, because it seems like the MCU is like trying to like stay away from Inhumans as much as possible. And I wasn't necessarily thinking he was going to be a metahuman or like, have enhanced powers or anything. Honestly, I would have been fine with. I did kind of like their direction where he was just, a human serial killer. Though I think giving him powers in the show would have made him a more interesting adversary, because so far we haven't really seen Daredevil, this version of Daredevil, deal with anybody with powers per se, besides, the heroes that he knows, unless you count like the Hand, who have like, some enhanced senses and stuff. But he hasn't really dealt with like somebody like much, much stronger than him in a superhuman kind of way. So that would have been cool, but I was totally fine with their direction where he's just a serial killer. But I felt like they introduced him way too late. They had a little bit of an introduction in like episode 1 where you should see him painting a mural, but that's it. You see him in like the end of episode 4, I think, and then he just kind of shows up in episode 6, and like everybody just kind of reacting to things he's doing, but there really wasn't much of a build up. So over halfway through the season, we don't really get to see Muse at all. I feel like they really should have been building him up the whole season. But instead, they didn't. They even introduced his alter ego, or I guess his real identity, Bastion, in like episode 1 or 2. But you don't see him again for like 4 episodes, and I don't know why they did that. I don't know if it had to do with the, way the last creative team did things, if there wasn't enough, like they didn't shoot enough footage with him, or they couldn't change things, or what, but he felt really underdeveloped. It felt like I felt like episode 6 kind of came out of left field and was just like, yeah, he's the bad guy, and now you know his identity, and he and Heather have had this relationship as therapist and patient for, however many months, but you haven't seen it at all. But now that, he and Daredevil have fought, now you have to see it. It just felt really underdeveloped. You didn't really know any motivation he had besides he's insane, which if that's the case, I feel like they should have explored that more. And I just feel like Muse is such an interesting, cool concept as a villain. He could have been like almost more Hannibal Lecter style, like not like the cannibal aspect, but just, that much of an adversary. And they just kind of botched it, because now they killed him off, so I don't see him coming back at all. At least in the comics, in the most recent comics, even though Muse is technically dead, in the more recent Daredevil comics where Daredevil's Elektra, he is like kind of back from the dead because he's controlling another artist like from hell, and this new artist, has taken up the mantle of Muse. Or at least they have that going on. I don't see the show doing that. It seems like they're going to focus more on Mayor Fisk going forward. But, I think he was a really cool inclusion, and especially considering, the show is rated mature. I think he was like one of the most perfect villains to include. And I just feel like they wasted him a bit. There was a couple really cool fight scenes, and I really liked the aesthetics of him. I really liked, the aesthetics of his lair and everything. And I like that they kept the whole art part. But he felt really like lacking in two-dimensional or one-dimensional whatever as a villain. And yeah, I just kind of, that was disappointing. That was probably the weakest part of the show for me, which is unfortunate because I was really like, Muse was one of the things I was most looking forward to about this show. Now, I do want to talk about one thing that didn't have to do with the comics we talked about. Now, it does have to do with the show, though, and that is Hector Ayala, aka the White Tiger. I did want to talk briefly about how the show's interpretation compares to the comics. Personally, I think they did a really good job with adapting a certain storyline in the comics. This story arc was in the early 2000s run with Brian Michael Bendis writing. It was only a 3-issue arc. I think it was like 38 through 40, but it was very similar to the show where Hector Ayala, White Tiger, gets blamed for killing a cop in the show. It was these dirty cops, and he did fight them, but the cop that died was an accident. In the comics, there was this robbery that White Tiger foiled, and the thieves killed a cop, and they left White Tiger standing there, seemingly, having killed the cop. And, in the show, Hector actually gets off because, there's isn't enough evidence to convict him of it and all that. But in the comics, Hector actually was found guilty in his trial. And instead of being shot by a dirty cop, which was revealed in the show to be Cole North, in the comics, Hector freaked out once he got his conviction in the courtroom, and he grabbed a guard's gun and he ran outside where there's a bunch of cops, and he ended up just pointing his gun at the cops and getting shot and killed in that way, which honestly, I mean, they're both really tragic. I honestly think the comics is a little more tragic, but at the same time, it's like the show is really tragic too because he got off. He was free to live his life and he was just murdered in cold blood. So, I don't know. I kind of prefer the way the show does it a bit, but I think they did a really good job adapting that storyline, and I'm really glad they did because that, like, early 2000s Daredevil run by Brian Michael Bendis, David Mack, Joe Quesada, some other writers, is just really, really good. I love that. Some of my favorite Daredevil stuff, so I'm really glad that they pulled from that. And honestly, going forward, it'd be really cool if they pulled from other storylines in that comic run. Last thing I want to talk about, I want to mention just briefly some expectations for season 2. So we know at the end of Daredevil Born Again or season 1 that Matt's building this army. In the show, a lot of people were disappointed that all we saw were just, some cops, Cherry, and a few other just more like normal human characters. Then there were a lot of people were disappointed that we didn't see any like heroes, any defenders or anything. But it seems from what I've heard, like both in rumors and some like comments from the showrunner, it seems like they're gonna be saving some defenders, involvement for season 2, which makes sense to me. I feel like it would have been nice to see like a cameo at the end of season 1, but I get why probably just scheduling conflicts and also kind of saving the surprise for season 2. I kind of understand all that, and it seems like they're still like working some stuff out. Honestly, it would be a real shame if we get to season 2 and there's no other vigilantes, no other defenders like Luke Cage, Jessica Jones, Iron Fist. None of them show up. Not only would it be a real bummer, it really wouldn't make sense because why would Daredevil be it already kind of doesn't make sense that there's no other heroes showing up yet to like deal with Fisk. But to have that in season 2, like I feel like they get a pass in season 1 for a few reasons, but if they don't if there's no other heroes that show up to help in season 2, it doesn't make any sense. But I'm really hoping for something kind of like this, that frame in the Mayor Fisk storyline where Daredevil recruits a bunch of different heroes. And I don't think it's too far-fetched. I mean, it's a little far-fetched because of money and everything. And like Spider-Man, I don't see that happening unless some miracle happens, because the rights with Tom Holland's Spider-Man is like Tom Holland's Spider-Man can't be into like Disney TV shows. So I heard rumors that Disney's trying to broker a deal with Sony, to change that. But even if they do, I don't see Tom Holland even being able to film any scenes for season 2 because they're currently filming season 2 of Daredevil Born Again. And Tom Holland, I think he just finished with the Odyssey and he's going to start working on the new Spider-Man movie and or Avengers Doomsday. So the earliest he might be able to film anything would be the very end of this year or early next year. So it's possible he could film a cameo or like one episode, but I don't see him, if he does show up, which is very, very, very unlikely. I don't see that happening, in a very substantial role or anything. But if he does, I mean, I'm just gonna like bow down and worship the Marvel gods because that would be amazing to finally see Daredevil and Spider-Man on the, well, I guess in this case, the small screen together, but just in live action. We saw, Matt Murdock and Peter Parker in No Way Home, but not their superhero alter egos teaming up. And now all the other characters, like Moon Knight, he's had his own show, but he hasn't really connected to anything else MCU, so I don't see them using Moon Knight. I don't think it would make that much sense narratively because so far he hasn't been established as like a street level hero so much. He's more of like a mystical Egyptian god type realm right now. But Luke Cage, Iron Fist, Jessica Jones, can totally see them coming in because, they're the Defenders. It seems like they're reviving not only the continuity of the Netflix show, but a lot of those characters. So if they don't show up, I'll be pretty disappointed, to be honest. Now, Misty Knight could work too. I don't know what the actress is doing right now, if she's busy. But, she was obviously introduced in the Luke Cage show. She was in the Defenders show. She could show up too. It might get a little crowded, but it could happen. I don't know if it'll happen, but I kind of hope to see Echo too. I really like Alakwa Cox as Echo, and it seems like she's posted stuff on Instagram recently where it seems like she's not filming anything, so it doesn't seem like she's gonna be in it. But considering how much of a tie she has to Fisk and how the Echo show was like Fisk had a huge role in that. I mean, it would kind of make sense for her to come back when she learns, that Fisk became mayor or something. But at the same time, the show ended where she seemed like she was kind of retiring. So I don't know. I'm just kind of like blabbing on about all this, but I really want to see at least some of these Defenders characters in season 2. It looks like that might be the case. I hope so. But it'd be a very cool thing, and I think it'd be cool if they do a little bit more than the comics because the comic just had them get arrested by Fisk immediately. So, but they are adapting more of the Devil's Reign storyline, seems like. So that could be like some really, really great action scenes and showdowns. But yeah, that's pretty much all there is to say about Dark Art and the Mayor Fisk comic storylines and how they tie or how they compare to the Born Again Disney Plus series. Now, wrapping things up, I want to talk about my cultured picks for this week of some books I've read that I thought were worthy of note. So, first off, just kind of the whole Absolute Superman series so far. I'm a few issues behind, but it's been really great. I feel like everybody's been talking about Absolute Batman, which is also great, but honestly, I've been really enjoying Absolute Superman, like even more. I think just the take of him, well, I guess spoilers for the series, but just him being a refugee from Krypton, but like at least as a kid, if not a young man, and now he's spending his time defending refugees and people who are being oppressed by, these awful people. And also just the fact that he got to have a relationship with his mom and dad as a kid and grew up on Krypton is really cool. And I like that the symbol isn't, it isn't the crest of the House of El. It's actually the symbol of like the lower working class on Krypton. And just having those different, like almost castes on Krypton, and it's just a really cool take on Superman, and I really love the art. The art is just like amazing, and whoever does the colors as well, so freaking good. I'm really enjoying it. I hope it keeps I hope it just keeps getting better and better. The other book I wanted to mention is the new Ultimate Wolverine series. To be honest, I've only read the first issue so far, but it's very interesting. And again, spoilers, like this takes place in the new Marvel Ultimate Universe, and it's basically asking like, what if Wolverine was actually the Winter Soldier, which is a really cool idea, having Wolverine being manipulated as, a mindless assassin, which we've seen in the comics, but that was originally kind of the whole Weapon X thing. but to combine that with the whole Winter Soldier idea is really cool to me. And it's also very interesting because he starts out the same way we've seen him before, like he is from Canada, I think, and he's part of a mutant rebellion against some of the oppressors in this new Ultimate Universe, especially the Russian ones, like the Rasputins. And, you know, they capture him after taking out a rebel base, and then they send him after the rebels, the mutant rebels, and he has to kill his friends, and he doesn't really know what he's doing because he's been brainwashed, and it's just really interesting. Like as a Wolverine fan, I'm really enjoying it. As a fan of the new Ultimate Universe, I'm really enjoying it. So it's just a very cool concept. I'm definitely going to be reading more, but definitely check that out if that sounds interesting to you. But that is the end of the episode for this week, everyone. Thank you again so much for sticking around and checking out this episode. If you happen to just have money laying around that you want to burn, please consider checking out The Cultured Nerd on patreon.com, helping support The Cultured Nerd and helping us keep bringing you more fun, cool comic and movie content. And if you want to support the Cultured Pull List specifically, you can check out the Cultured Pull List tier on that Patreon page. Be sure to like and subscribe, and hit that bell icon too so you're alerted whenever there's a new episode. If you want to check out the Cultured Pull List on socials, you can scan the QR code on the bottom left. And if you want to check out Casual Experts, which is my other brand where I do another podcast on, it's more about movies and pop culture and nerdy stuff as a whole. You can check that out by scanning the QR code on the bottom right. Also checking out that social media. And that will do it for this week. I have been your host, Mike. Thank you again for watching. Until next time, be sure to take care of yourselves and read some comics.